All right, let's talk about ChatGPT. I'll start very basic. I'll go over a couple of disclaimers, some guidelines for the most effective use, then how I have been using it, and then some really excellent examples of the best way I believe to use it. So what is ChatGPT? It's a large language model, LLM. You'll see that acronym a lot cropping up, and it's one of many. So there's Bing, Google, OpenAI, even Facebook with Llama. They've all got these machine learning algorithms that they've been pumping out into the world. But ChatGPT is the one that most people are familiar with, and it's the one that I've been using literally every single day since it was released last November. So that's what we're going to focus on. And it was created by OpenAI. It uses a token-based generative system to imagine what the next word would be in a natural way, as if it were human. So you've got people like Blake Lemoine, who's a Google engineer who thinks these things are alive, and I'm not of that perspective. And then you've got people like the famous physicist Michio Kaku, who thinks they're glorified tape recorders. I'd say they're somewhere in between, but definitely more towards the tape recorder side. It really looks massively impressive upon first use, but as somebody who's used it every single day for at least a couple of hours weekly, it loses its polish over time as you start to find how formulaic it is and discover some of the pitfalls. So that's where I'd like to talk about some disclaimers, and it's really essential to be aware of the following. So let's talk about ownership. The problem with ownership and using ChatGPT is that via the user agreements, everything you type in there is now technically the property of, or at least OpenAI has access to it. So if you are posting very private information, that would be a big no-no. Please do not put in any financial details, any personal contracts or contacts, anything that you wouldn't want to share on a public social media post, I think is a really good example of that. So for myself, it's been really useful for summaries of things like the BEAD funding, because that's fed in state, that's very public. It's not like I'm losing anything or giving up secret information that I don't want the company to have. So also you need to manage your expectations, play around with it a bit, and it'll come down in how impressive it is quite swiftly. So I've already talked about avoiding sensitive information. I would also like to be really, really heavy-handed in the next cautionary tale. You need to proofread everything. Proofread everything. Triple check, because the program, it generates misinformation straight up in what users are calling hallucinations. It'll just start to invent stuff if it gets tired or lazy, if you're not super precise. So when you're composing stuff, it's better to be really cautious and super hyper specific. I'll get into that a little bit more later, because like I said, you don't want to double barrel things. You want to give it one command at a time so that it can complete it the most effectively that it can, but you want to add a lot of context and a lot of variables that it will abide by in that. Like I said, you want to be very precise, but not double barrel. Don't ask it to do things simultaneously, but ask it to do something with a lot of compounding portions to your prompt. So because with the current limitations on the usage of ChatGPT being 50 uses per 3 hours, if you're using the 4.0 build, it's really important and vital to maximize how much quality and how much material you're getting out of that. So by asking ChatGPT to perform multiple things in a single prompt, you extract much more value from each interaction. So instead of saying something like proofread this, I would ask ChatGPT to proofread as a professional copy editor with expertise in broadband. See, so I've asked it to do one thing, but I've clarified massively how it should be doing that. So you're basically getting 3 for 1. Then you can dig even deeper. Rather than just say as a professional copy editor, you can say things like a name, like Theodore M. Bernstein, or William Shawn, or Benjamin Dreyer, or Lynn Truss, people who are famous for their copy editing prowess and who have risen to excellence in this domain. Now, to clarify there, sometimes if you ask it to emulate a certain person, like a very specific individual, it will try to protect itself legally or ethically by insisting that it cannot pretend to be someone. So that's fair, I guess, but you're not asking it to pretend to be someone. So if it ever feeds you some kind of disclaimer saying, oh, I can't do that, that's not right, because then it could be misconstrued as something that they generated, and that's not ethical. So don't say be Theodore, say write in a style that is emulative of, and then insert the famous person that you like, right? So this could be as profound as Shakespeare, or as simple as anybody else that you'd like to plug in. Beyond proofreading, ask it not only proofread, but explain why it made the changes, adding depth to the editing process. So you wouldn't just say, hey, make this good, right? That's too simple and too silly. And it might do an okay job without clarity. But what would be really helpful, and what I found really helpful, is asking it to describe why it's making the changes that it is. That way you can be really cognizant of what it had done and then choose to adopt it or not. And this approach allows me to understand ChatGPT's rationale and decide whether I agree with the edits, promoting a more collaborative process, right? Rather than just trusting some mindless artificial intelligence. One of the ways in which I really improved the performance of ChatGPT for myself, and something that you could try to do in your own way, is by utilizing my past work, by pasting chunks of my publicly available master's thesis, which is already common domain, and I created it for the good of humanity, so it's out there. It's not really mine anymore. And I was able to capture through ChatGPT my unique style. So how did I do that? Yes, pasting chunks. But then I asked ChatGPT to analyze and describe my writing style in excruciating detail. So what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it would take to emulate my best work. Then, after it created that description, and whatever materials you choose to post in, it's up to you, but you can take what it tells you it would demand to emulate your style and copy and paste it into subsequent chats. So by copying and pasting the analysis back into the platform with instructions, I train the system to mimic my style, allowing for a more personalized experience. So that's a pretty cool feature there. And now let's jump into some of the most valuable features and how to utilize them. So I'd say summary. The best use I have found from ChatGPT is the ability to summarize effectively, but it's only ideal for short texts. It's great for summarizing small documents, but loses effectiveness with larger files. Like I said, if you give it too big of an ask, it starts to hallucinate and get a little tired and a little lazy. So you can use a segmentation strategy. So summarize longer texts by breaking them into smaller parts. Let's say a 12-page PDF. It will not even attempt. It'll spit out some kind of qualifier saying, oh, wow, you've overloaded me. So you just take page by page the PDF and ask it to summarize in that capacity. And then again, I know I'm going to harp on this a lot, but verify the summaries. Do not imagine that what it generates is an accurate reflection of the original text. So it will save you a lot of time in the manual labor of typing up the summary, but you really need to ensure that it is a genuine summary because ChatGPT just kind of makes stuff up. So there you go, summarizing and segmenting summaries to get past the barrier of too large of an ask. There's also assuming roles and identities. This is something that for me has been massively helpful. It's useful for mimicking specific roles, classes, or cultural perspectives. So what you can do is you can utilize it as a pre-critique tool to make sure you're not suffering from some kind of oversight or something insensitive, right? Not a Native American. I couldn't ever pretend to occupy that headspace. But because of the massive amount of data that ChatGPT does have, it'll never do that either, but it'll come a little bit closer than me as just some random white guy. So you could plug something into that and say, how might a Native American take issue or umbrage with what I'm pasting here? Then it'll do its best job trying to catch things that you might not have thought of. And it doesn't always need to be that, right? It could be a client, whichever person you'd like. Just describe the person and then say, how would they react to this? So you would say, an elected official in a rural district in the Western United States. Imagine you are this. Now, paste in what you're about to send to them and say, what issues might this person I'm describing have with this? You can also use it to brainstorm, but it gets kind of lazy. You need to be really specific and you need to make demands. So specify the number of ideas you want to avoid the laziness in that output, right? If you say, come up with a couple of taglines, it will do exactly that, just a couple. Or if you say, come up with some taglines or come up with taglines, it might give you just 4 or 5, maybe even 2, because that is still being faithful to your demand. But it's not nearly as helpful as if it were to generate something like 100. So just be very clear, because again, you want to protect yourself from running out of these credits. So I'd say those are the big 3, well, big 4, really. It would be, yeah, summarizing, assuming roles and identities, brainstorming, and then critiquing. So hopefully that's been helpful. I'll go into custom instructions and all sorts of additional items in the next video, but I know that's a lot to absorb. So I'll produce a document that has all of this data for you and hope you find some benefit from it.